"Know your place," Julian Hawthorne hissed, voice low enough that the glittering crowd of Manhattan elites wouldn't hear, but sharp enough to make Amara flinch beneath her carefully applied makeup. She had committed the unforgivable sin of speaking to his business partner without being spoken to first. His fingers dug into her wrist, leaving crescent-shaped impressions on her brown skin, temporary marks to accompany the permanent scars his words had left over their 11 months of marriage. What Amara couldn't understand, what kept her awake night after night in her separate bedroom wing, wasn't the cruelty itself. It was the hatred burning behind it, a hatred too personal, too visceral to be explained by a reluctant, arranged marriage alone. Happy New Year, my beloved listener. Where are you watching from today? I need to know. Hit that subscribe button right now and click the like button. What happens next will leave you speechless. Let's continue. Amara smiled reflexively, years of practice composure allowing her to maintain the graceful facade expected of a Hawthorne wife, while internally counting backward from 10, a technique her therapist had suggested for managing moments of acute distress. It didn't help that she could feel Vivian Hawthorne's gaze tracking her from across the charity gala, her mother-in-law's eyes sharp with disapproval despite the pleasant smile fixed on her aging but still beautiful face. "Of course, darling," Amara murmured, the endearment like ashes on her tongue. "Forgive me." Julian released her wrist with a barely perceptible nod, satisfied by her submission. At 34, he cut an imposing figure in his custom tuxedo, tall, with the chiseled features that graced the cover of Forbes last quarter and the cold blue eyes that had assessed her like property the day his father had introduced them. A perfect specimen of old money, with the casual cruelty to match. "Fetch me a scotch," he instructed, already turning away to resume his conversation, dismissing her as one might a servant rather than a spouse. Amara moved toward the bar with practiced grace, her midnight blue gown, selected by Vivian, like everything in her carefully curated wardrobe, flowing around her like water. She had learned to navigate these events on autopilot, to smile and nod and speak only when appropriate, to be the exotic accessory that somehow enhanced the Hawthorne legacy rather than tarnished it. What she hadn't yet learned was why they had chosen her specifically. Why? Out of all possible candidates, had Alexander Hawthorne insisted his son marry the orphan daughter of a distant family connection? A girl raised in modest circumstances by a distant aunt after her parents' tragic accident? A black woman whose presence in their lily-white dynasty raised eyebrows, even in supposedly progressive high society. The question had plagued her since the day Alexander had appeared at her small Queens apartment, offering a marriage proposal that wasn't really an offer at all. She had been 23, barely supporting herself as a library assistant while pursuing a master's degree in art history. The full scholarship she'd been counting on had mysteriously evaporated, leaving her with mounting debt and dwindling options. It would honor an old family obligation, Alexander had explained, his voice gentle despite the steel behind his eyes. Your parents would have wanted this connection secured. Parents she barely remembered. A car accident when she was 4 had left her with only fragments. Her mother's laugh, her father's hands guiding hers across piano keys, the scent of her mother's gardenia perfume. The rest was constructed from photographs and stories told by Ms. Winters, her parents' former housekeeper who had occasionally checked on her throughout childhood. At the crowded bar, Amara ordered Julian's preferred scotch, nodding politely to acquaintances who acknowledged her with a particular blend of curiosity and condescension reserved for those who had married far above their perceived station. "Mrs. Hawthorne," the voice, warm, with a hint of a southern accent, startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find an elderly gentleman watching her with an intensity that seemed at odds with the casual setting. "Forgive me," he continued, noticing her confusion. "Walter Green. I was your father's attorney many years ago." Amara's breath caught. Mentions of her parents were rare enough to immediately command her full attention. "You knew my father? And your mother?" Something flickered across his weathered features. Sadness? Guilt? Brilliant people, both of them. Their work in agricultural engineering was revolutionary. The coal irrigation system still provides sustainable water access across 3 continents. Coal irrigation system? The name sparked no recognition. In the scattered stories she'd heard, her parents had been described as professors, not engineers or inventors. "I think you must be mistaken," Amara said carefully. My parents taught at a community college. They didn't. Is there a problem here? Julian materialized beside her, his hand possessively circling her waist in a gesture that might have appeared affectionate to observers but felt like a vice to Amara. His eyes assessed Walter Green with the cold calculation he brought to all potential threats. No problem at all, the older man replied, his southern charm firmly back in place. Just complimenting your lovely wife on her remarkable resemblance to her mother. Eliza had the same distinctive eyes, uniquely amber, almost golden in certain light. Julian's fingers tightened against Amara's ribs. You knew my wife's family? Oh, many years ago, Walter replied easily, though something in his expression remained watchful. The architectural world is smaller than people realize. Your father-in-law consulted on several projects I was involved with. Amara frowned slightly. My father was an architect? I was told he taught architectural theory, not that he practiced. Before Walter could respond, Vivian Hawthorne appeared, her silver blonde updo impeccable as always, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists like armor. Mr. Green, she greeted him, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. What a surprise to see you here. I wasn't aware you were on the museum's donor list. Recent addition, he replied with equal coolness. After my retirement, I found myself with time to appreciate fine art, along with other long-neglected matters. Something passed between them, a current of recognition and mutual assessment that raised goosebumps along Amara's arms despite the ballroom's careful climate control. Julianne, darling, Vivian said, never taking her eyes from Walter. The Morgans are looking for you. Something about the Tokyo acquisition. You know how Thomas hates to be kept waiting. It was a transparent dismissal. But Julian nodded, years of conditioning to his mother's authority overriding even his desire to monitor his wife. Of course. Amara, come along. Actually, Vivian interrupted smoothly. I need to borrow Amara for a moment. Ladies' room, emergency. She patted her immaculate coiffure with a meaningful glance that would translate to any society wife. Lipstick check, powder touch-up, the universal code of feminine maintenance. Julian hesitated only briefly before nodding. Don't be long. The Kincaids want photos for their foundation newsletter. As he strode away, Vivian's pleasant expression hardened. She turned to Walter with the barely contained fury of a woman unaccustomed to having her carefully orchestrated world disrupted. Whatever game you're playing, Walter, I suggest you reconsider. The statute of limitations has long expired on any concerns you might wish to raise. Walter's smile remained fixed, but his eyes carried a steely determination that reminded Amara of her own reflection on her stronger days. Some matters transcend legal time frames, Vivian, as I'm sure Alexander would agree. Amara looked between them, confusion and a growing sense of unease tightening her chest. What concerns? What are you talking about? Vivian's hand closed around Amara's arm with surprising strength for a woman in her 60s. Nothing that need concern you, dear. Mr. Green was just leaving. Actually, Walter said, reaching into his suit jacket and extracting a business card that he offered to Amara. I was hoping to continue our conversation about your parents' legacy, perhaps over lunch. Before Amara could accept the card, Vivian intercepted it, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as her hand moved with surprising speed. How thoughtful, she said, tucking the card into her clutch purse. But Amara's schedule is quite full with charity obligations. I'll have my assistant contact you if an opening arises. Walter's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Of course, though I should mention that I've recently been in contact with the trustees of the Cole Foundation. They've expressed interest in meeting the daughter of their founders, particularly now that she's reached the age specified in the original trust documents. Vivian went utterly still, the only indication of her distress the slight whitening of her knuckles around her champagne flute. The Cole Foundation was dissolved decades ago, temporarily dormant. Walter corrected with the precision of a man accustomed to legal exactitude, but never dissolved. The terms were quite specific about reactivation when certain conditions were met. Something about the exchange sent a chill through Amara despite the crowded warmth of the ballroom. She had never heard of any foundation connected to her family name, had never known her parents as anything more than vague, loving shadows at the edges of her earliest memories. Yet Walter spoke with the confidence of intimate knowledge. while Vivian's reaction suggested his words carried weight beyond simple social awkwardness. "What trust documents?" Amara asked, finding her voice despite the warning pressure of Vivian's fingers on her arm. "What foundation?" Walter's gaze settled on her, with an intensity that seemed to see beyond her carefully constructed Hawthorne facade to something deeper, something perhaps even Amara herself had forgotten existed. "Your birthright," he said simply. "The legacy your parents left in your name. One that was meant to come to you on your 25th birthday, which, if memory serves, passed 8 months ago." The timeline sent a jolt through Amara's system. 8 months ago, Alexander Hawthorne had appeared at her apartment with his non-negotiable marriage proposal. 8 months ago, her scholarship had mysteriously vanished, leaving her financially vulnerable to his offer. 8 months ago, she had been rushed into a marriage that felt more like a business transaction than a union of hearts. Before she could voice the questions suddenly flooding her mind, the distinctive sound of silver against crystal cut through the ambient noise of the gala. Alexander Hawthorne, patriarch of the dynasty that bore his name, stood on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, commanding attention with the ease of a man accustomed to power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now quieting crowd. "Thank you for joining us in supporting the Metropolitan Museum's new wing. The Hawthorne family has always believed that preserving our cultural heritage is not just philanthropy, but obligation." As Alexander continued his practiced speech, Vivian's grip on Amara's arm tightened painfully. "We should join Julian for the family photos," she murmured, the steel beneath her pleasant tone unmistakable. "Mr. Green, always a pleasure." Walter gave a small nod that contained neither agreement nor submission. "We'll speak again soon, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his gaze fixed meaningfully on Amara rather than Vivian. "About your parents, about what was taken from you, and about what rightfully belongs to you now." As Vivian practically dragged her through the crowd toward where Julian waited near the stage, Amara's mind raced with questions she had never thought to ask. About parents she barely remembered, about a foundation she'd never heard mentioned, about a birthright supposedly waiting for her at 25, the exact age she had been when Alexander Hawthorne appeared with his non-negotiable proposal. And beneath it all, a suspicion that grew with each step toward the family that had never truly accepted her, that the cruelty in Julian's eyes, the contempt in Vivian's smile, the calculation in Alexander's gaze, all of it might be rooted in something far darker than the arranged marriage she had believed she was entering. Something tied to her name, to her blood, to a legacy someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep her from claiming. As she took her place beside Julian for the photographer, his hand settling possessively at her waist, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered his customary warning, "Smile like you mean it, and know your place," Amara felt something shift deep inside her. For the first time since donning the Hawthorne name, she wondered if perhaps her true place wasn't where they had positioned her at all. If perhaps the hatred in Julian's eyes stemmed not from obligation, but from fear. Fear of who she truly was, and what she might become if she ever discovered the truth. Vivian Hawthorne's network was terrifyingly efficient. Within 24 hours of the gala, Walter Green's business card had mysteriously vanished from her purse. His law firm claimed he was unavailable indefinitely, and Amara's schedule suddenly overflowed with charity luncheons and foundation appearances that required Vivian's constant accompaniment. The Hawthorne name carries responsibilities. Vivian reminded her over breakfast in the mansion's e-solarium, her voice pleasant but her eyes sharp as she reviewed Amara's newly packed calendar. These connections must be nurtured properly. Prison wardens used gentler language to describe surveillance. Amara sipped her tea, careful to maintain the placid exterior she had perfected since becoming Julian's wife. "Of course, though I had hoped to visit the library this week for my research on early American portraiture." The lie came smoothly. She had no such research planned, but the Manhattan Public Library's genealogy department might hold records about the mysterious Cole Foundation. If her parents had been important enough to create a charitable trust, there would be public documentation somewhere. "Perhaps next month," Vivian replied without looking up. "The Kincaid Foundation Gala requires your immediate attention. As the Hawthorne representative on their board, your appearance is non-negotiable." The subtext was clear. Your time is not your own. Your movements will be monitored, Your independence is an illusion we allow. I understand, Amara murmured, swallowing frustration along with her cooling tea. Wonderful, Vivian said, finally meeting her gaze with that practiced society smile that never reached her eyes. Julian mentioned you seemed distracted after the museum event. It's important that we maintain appropriate focus, particularly with the Henderson merger approaching. The warning was thinly veiled. The Henderson merger represented billions in potential revenue for Hawthorne Industries, a deal Alexander had been cultivating for years. Nothing could interfere with the family's pristine image during negotiations, especially not uncomfortable questions about a decades-old trust or mysterious family connections. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Julian appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the office in a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his cold good looks. His gaze swept over Amara with the same detached assessment he might give a particularly troublesome investment property. Mother, he acknowledged Vivian with a slight nod before addressing Amara. My father requires your presence at dinner tonight. The Hendersons are joining us. We're the Green Valentino. It makes you look almost acceptable. The casual cruelty, delivered without heat, as if stating an obvious fact, was typical of their private interactions. What wasn't typical was the slight tension around his eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw that suggested something beyond his usual contempt. He was worried, and anything that worried Julian Hawthorne was worth investigating. Of course, Amara replied, lowering her lashes to hide the calculation in her eyes. The Valentino is perfect for welcoming our guests. Julian studied her for a moment longer, searching for signs of defiance or distress. Finding none in her carefully composed features, he gave another curt nod. Don't be late. Father despises tardiness, especially when it delays business. As he turned to leave, Amara gathered her courage. Julian, I was wondering if you knew anything about the Cole Foundation. An elderly gentleman mentioned it at the gala, and I realized I know so little about my parents' work. The effect of her casual question was instantaneous and startling. Julian froze mid-step, his shoulders rigid beneath expensive Italian wool. When he turned back, his expression had transformed from cold indifference to something far more dangerous, a focused intensity that raised the hairs on the back of Amara's neck. Who mentioned the Cole Foundation? He demanded, crossing the room in 3 quick strides to tower over a chair. What exactly did they say? Behind him, Vivian had gone perfectly still, her teacup suspended halfway to her lips, her eyes sharp with sudden alarm. Amara forced herself to maintain eye contact despite the instinctive urge to shrink from Julian's looming presence. Just an older gentleman who claimed to know my father. He mentioned something about irrigation systems and a trust that was supposed to activate when I turned 25. She kept her tone deliberately light, as if recounting an amusing anecdote rather than information that had clearly struck a nerve. I assumed he was confused. Walter Green, Vivian supplied, setting down her cup with a sharp click against the saucer. A senile old man trying to relive his glory days by fabricating connections to prominent families. Julian's gaze never left Amara's face. This man approached you specifically? Asked for you by name? He recognized me. Amara said carefully, watching Julian's reaction. Said I have my mother's eyes. Something flickered across Julian's features. Not just anger or concern, but something that looked almost like guilt. It disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it, replaced by his usual cold contempt. Green is a disgraced attorney with a personal vendetta against successful families like ours, he said flatly. He's attempted to extort money from several prominent dynasties using similar tactics, approaching vulnerable family members with fabricated stories about hidden fortunes or secret pasts. The explanation was delivered with such smooth confidence that it would have been convincing if not for the pulse visibly throbbing at Julian's temple, a tell she had learned to recognize during their brief courtship as a sign he was lying. How unfortunate, Amara murmured, dropping her gaze to hide the spark of determination his reaction had ignited. I'm glad you warned me. Julian's hand suddenly gripped her chin, forcing her face up to meet his gaze. His fingers were cold against her skin, his blue eyes searching hers with unsettling intensity. If he contacts you again, you will tell me immediately. Do you understand? The command, delivered in the same tone he might use with a disobedient child, sent a flush of anger through Amara's veins. But she kept her expression neutral, years of practiced self-control preventing her from revealing the rebellion building inside her. "Of course," she replied, "the perfect picture of wifely obedience. I would never keep secret from my husband." The irony of the statement hung between them. A marriage built entirely on secrets and obligation, on carefully maintained appearances that masked something darker beneath. Julian released her chin with a slight push that stopped just short of being physically abusive. "See that you don't." He straightened, adjusting his already perfect tie in a gesture Amara recognized as self-soothing. Another tell he wasn't aware of. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." After he left, Vivian resumed her breakfast as if nothing unusual had occurred, but the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her teacup betrayed her unease. "Julian simply wants to protect you from opportunists," she said, her tone falsely bright. The Hawthorne name attracts all manner of unsavory characters, including the Hawthornes themselves, Amara thought but didn't say. Instead, she offered a placating smile. "Of course, I'm fortunate to have such a protective family." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it served its purpose. Vivian's shoulders relaxed slightly, her surveillance temporarily satisfied by Amara's apparent submission. As she excused herself to prepare for her day of carefully orchestrated appearances, Amara's mind raced with new questions. Julian's extreme reaction confirmed her suspicions. The Cole Foundation wasn't a confused old man's invention. It was real, and the Hawthornes were terrified she would discover it. But why? What possible threat could a dormant foundation pose to one of the wealthiest families in America? And what connection did it have to the arranged marriage she'd been pressured into just as she reached the age specified in some mysterious trust document? The Hawthorne Mansion, a sprawling limestone edifice on Fifth Avenue that had housed 4 generations of the dynasty, contained 97 rooms, most of which remained mysteries to Amara despite nearly a year in residence. Her movements within the house were subtly but effectively restricted through social engineering rather than explicit rules. Certain wings were being renovated, others contained valuable collections that required specialized climate control, and still others were simply not part of the family's daily living areas. The message was clear. This house may bear your married name, but it is not your home. Know your place. But tonight, with Julian working late and Vivian occupied with last-minute arrangements for the Henderson dinner, Amara finally had an opportunity to explore. Specifically, to access the one room that might contain answers about her past, Alexander Hawthorne's private study. Located in the mansion's west wing, the study was Alexander's inner sanctum, a place where family members entered by invitation only, where business deals were sealed with century-old scotch, and where, Amara suspected, secrets were stored behind locked drawers and password-protected files. Accessing it required careful timing and a believable excuse if discovered. Fortunately, she had prepared both. The family's head housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, had served the Hawthornes for over 40 years, long enough to remember the early days of Alexander's empire, perhaps even long enough to know something about the Cole family if they had indeed been connected to the Hawthornes in the past. Mrs. Reynolds, Amara approached the older woman in the service corridor near the kitchens, careful to time their encounter when no other staff would be present. "I wonder if you might help me with something?" The housekeeper paused, her expression professionally neutral despite the surprise Amara could detect in her eyes. The Hawthorne bride rarely interacted directly with staff, another unspoken rule in her carefully constrained existence. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. How may I assist you?" Amara offered her most disarming smile, the one she had perfected during her years of navigating academia on scholarships and part-time jobs, where likability could sometimes make the difference between opportunity and rejection. "I'm planning a surprise for Mr. Hawthorne's birthday next month," she explained, the lie smooth after days of rehearsal. "A custom leather portfolio with a family crest. But I realized I'm not certain of the exact design. I thought perhaps Mr. Alexander might have a reference book or a historical document in his study that shows the authentic crest." Mrs. Reynolds' expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of the transparent excuse to access a forbidden space. "Mr. Alexander keeps the family archives locked in his private safe, Mrs. Hawthorne. But I believe there's a framed version of the crest in the library's east alcove." "Oh, but I need the historical version," Amara pressed gently. Julian mentioned something about quarterly differences in the original design compared to the modern simplification. I'd hate to commission an incorrect version. The housekeeper hesitated, years of loyalty to the Hawthorne family warring with the basic courtesy due to the newest family member. Finally, she sighed. Mr. Alexander is attending a board meeting until 8 this evening. His study is typically unlocked during his absence, though I wouldn't advise— Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds, Amara interrupted with warm gratitude. I'll be quick and discreet. This means so much to me, to be able to give Julian something that honors his heritage properly. The irony of her statement, using Julian's obsession with lineage and propriety as her cover for investigating the very heritage she'd been denied, was not lost on Amara. But desperation had made her both creative and bold. Mrs. Reynolds nodded once, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. The heraldry reference volumes would be on the east bookshelf, third shelf from the top, if they're anywhere. It wasn't explicit permission, but it was tacit acknowledgement of Amara's right to access family information. The first such concession she'd received from any member of the household. Thank you, she said again, genuine gratitude in her voice despite the deception. I appreciate your help more than I can express. As Mrs. Reynolds continued down the hallway, Amara checked her watch. 6:30. Alexander wouldn't return for at least an hour, and Vivian was occupied with the florist in the main dining room. It was now or never. The West Wing corridor stretched before her like a museum gallery. Artwork worth millions adorning walls that had witnessed generations of Hawthorne triumphs and transgressions. Alexander's study occupied the corner position, its double mahogany doors imposing even when closed. Amara's heart pounded as she approached, her palms damp with nervous perspiration despite her outward composure. If she were caught, the consequences would be severe. Not physical punishment. The Hawthornes were too refined for such obvious cruelty, but the subtle, devastating sanctions of privilege withdrawn, charity board positions eliminated, graduate program connections severed, the limited independence she'd maintained systematically dismantled. But the alternative, remaining ignorant of her own history while the Hawthornes continued whatever deception they were perpetrating, was unacceptable. The study doors were unlocked, as Mrs. Reynolds had suggested. They opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a space that perfectly embodied Alexander Hawthorne's public persona, old-world luxury tempered with modern efficiency. Leather-bound books and antique maps shared space with cutting-edge technology and contemporary art. Power and tradition in perfect balance. Amara closed the doors behind her, conscious that every second inside increased her risk of discovery. Where to begin? The computer would be password protected. The wall safe would be impossible to access without combinations. She needed information that would be hidden in plain sight. Documentation too mundane to secure, but too potentially useful to destroy. Her gaze landed on the massive desk that dominated the room center. 3 tidy stacks of folders occupied one corner, a laptop computer the other. Between them sat a leather blotter calendar and a silver frame containing a formal Hawthorne family portrait. Alexander and Vivian seated, Julian standing behind them, his hand resting possessively on Amara's shoulder. Her smile in the photograph was perfect, practiced, and completely false. She began with the desk drawers, careful to note the exact position of each item before moving it. The top right drawer contained standard office supplies. The left, various technology accessories, chargers, adapters, flash drives labeled with project names she didn't recognize. The deeper drawers yielded more interesting findings. Files organized by year and subject, most related to Hawthorne Industries' various divisions and acquisitions. Nothing about the Cole Foundation or any mysterious trust. Amara's spirits sank as she carefully restored each drawer to its original state. Perhaps she had misunderstood Walter Green's comments. Perhaps Julian's reaction had been about something else entirely. As she rose to check the bookshelves, her stated reason for being there, if discovered. I caught something unusual, a slight discoloration on the hardwood floor near the corner of the massive desk, as if something had been spilled and imperfectly cleaned. It formed a rough arc, suggesting the desk had once been positioned differently, then moved to cover the stain. Curiosity piqued. Amara knelt to examine the floor more closely. The discoloration was subtle but distinct, a darker patch. Against the cherry hardwood, and beside it, barely visible unless one was specifically looking, was the edge of what appeared to be a small trapdoor or access panel, mostly concealed beneath the desk's bulk. Heart racing, she lay flat on the floor and extended her arm beneath the desk, fingers searching for an edge or handle. The panel was approximately 12 inches square. It seems nearly invisible against the wood grain. It took several attempts before she found the recessed fingerhold that allowed it to be lifted. Inside the shallow compartment was a single item, a leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with a simple design, two intertwined letters CS forming a distinctive logo. Below it, in elegant script, Cole Agricultural Holdings, EST 1974. Amara's hands trembled as she carefully extracted the book and opened it. The first page contained a handwritten inscription, asterisk for our daughter, Amara. May you one day continue what we've begun. With endless love, Martin and Eliza Cole. Asterisk, the simple dedication sent a shock through her system. The first direct connection to parents who had existed for her primarily in photographs and fragmented memories. She traced the writing with trembling fingers, imagining her father's hand forming these words, her mother perhaps looking over his shoulder as he wrote. The ledger contained detailed records of property holdings, patent registrations, and financial transactions spanning nearly 2 decades. Agricultural innovations, water purification systems, sustainable farming techniques, all developed by Cole Agricultural Holdings and licensed to entities across the globe. The final entries, dated shortly before her parents' deaths, showed company assets totaling over $3 billion, with projected growth that would have doubled that figure within 5 years. $3 billion. In 1999, Amara's mind reeled as she tried to process the implications. Her parents hadn't been modest academics. They had been visionary entrepreneurs and inventors whose work had apparently revolutionized agricultural practices worldwide. They had been, by any definition, extraordinarily wealthy. So why had she been raised in near poverty by a distant aunt who claimed to receive only a modest stipend for her care? Why had she struggled through college on scholarships and part-time jobs if her parents had left a multi-billion-dollar legacy? And what did the Hawthorns have to do with any of it? The final page of the ledger provided a clue, a document that made her blood run cold. A transfer of trusteeship dated 3 days after her parents' deaths, naming one, Helen Winters, as interim trustee of the Cole Foundation and guardian of all associated assets until Amara Cole reached the age of 25. Helen Winters. The name struck a chord in Amara's memory, the housekeeper who had occasionally checked on her throughout childhood, the woman who had supposedly been her parents' loyal employee, a woman who, Amara suddenly realized with sickening clarity, bore a striking resemblance to a younger Vivian Hawthorne. The sound of voices in the corridor outside froze her in place, the damning ledger still open in her hands. Alexander's distinctive baritone, returning earlier than expected, and with him, Julian, their conversation growing clearer as they approached the study doors. Becoming a problem, Julian was saying, tension evident in his voice. Green's appearance was no coincidence. Someone leaked information. Impossible, Alexander replied, his tone dismissive. The original documents were destroyed decades ago. The trust exists now only as a legal fiction to maintain our control of the patents. Then explain how he knew about the 25-year clause, Julian countered, their footsteps stopping just outside the study. That detail was in the original trust document only, not in any of the amended versions. A lucky guess, or perhaps, Alexander's voice cut off abruptly as the study doors swung open, revealing Amara kneeling beside his desk, the Cole ledger open in her hands, her expression caught between shock and dawning comprehension. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch eternally, the three of them remained frozen in a tableau of revelation and betrayal. Alexander in the doorway, Julian beside him, Amara with irrefutable evidence of deception clutched in her trembling hands. It was Julian who recovered first, his handsome face transforming with a fury more naked than any emotion he had ever displayed in her presence. "You stupid, interfering bitch," he snarled, crossing the room in 3 long strides to tower over her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" But Amara was beyond intimidation now, the truth burning through her veins like fire. burning away the careful submission she had cultivated for 11 long months. "I think I'm beginning to understand exactly what you've done," she replied, rising to her feet with a ledger clutched protectively against her chest. "All of you. For 21 years. She turned to Alexander, whose calculating eyes were already assessing damage, weighing options, formulating strategies to contain this catastrophic breach. "My parents didn't die in a simple car accident, did they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake rumbling through her world. "And Helen Winters wasn't just their housekeeper. She was Vivian, your wife, using a false identity to gain control of their assets. To gain control of me." Alexander's expression remained impassive, but the slight whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the doorframe betrayed his shock. "You're distraught and jumping to irrational conclusions," he said, his tone reasonable, placating. "That ledger is an early draft of a business proposal your father and I were developing before his tragic death. Nothing more. Then why hide it beneath a false panel in your floor?" Amara challenged. "Why orchestrate my marriage to Julian precisely when I turned 25, the age specified in my parents' trust? Why work so hard to keep me from learning anything about my own history?" Julian moved with startling speed, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. "Enough," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Give me that ledger and go to your room like a good little wife." For the first time since their wedding day, Amara looked at her husband without fear or resignation, only clear-eyed recognition of what he truly was. Not a reluctant participant in an arranged marriage, but an active conspirator in the theft of her birthright. "No," she said simply, the single syllable carrying the weight of every indignity she had silently endured, every dismissal she had swallowed, every time she had diminished herself to accommodate his cruelty. Julian's eyes widened in momentary shock before narrowing dangerously. "What did you say to me?" Amara met his gaze steadily, 21 years of buried truth lending steel to her spine. "I said no, Julian. I will not give you this ledger. I will not go to my room. And I will not continue pretending that this marriage is anything but what it truly is, a calculated attempt to legally control what your family stole from mine." The truth, spoken aloud at last, seemed to vibrate in the air between them, irrevocable, undeniable, and utterly transformative. In that moment, Amara felt something shift inside her, as if pieces of herself long separated were finally reconnecting. She was not just Amara Hawthorne, the quiet black girl who had married above her station. She was Amara Cole, daughter of brilliant innovators, rightful heir to a legacy that had been deliberately hidden from her. And as Julian's fingers tightened painfully around her wrist, as Alexander's expression hardened from false concern to cold calculation, as the full dangerous reality of her situation became clear, Amara made a silent vow to herself and to the parents whose memory had been desecrated. She would reclaim what was hers, no matter the cost. And the Hawthorns would learn, too late, the dangerous miscalculation they had made in believing she would never discover her true place. Not beneath them, as they had intended, but as their reckoning. Where are you watching from? I need to know if you are enjoying this story. Hit that subscribe button faster than Julian's mask dropped when he saw Amara with that ledger. Trust me, what happens next will have you screaming at your screen. Will Amara escape the mansion with the proof? What will the Hawthorns do now that she knows? I'm eager to read your expectations in the comments. Hashtag know your place. The billionaire told his black wife. The reason why he hated her shocked everyone. Hashtag part 3. Final resolution. Julian's grip was bruising, his fury radiating like heat as he towered over Amara. Give me the ledger. But something had fundamentally changed in the equation between them. Where once there had been fear, now there was clarity. Where submission had reigned, determination took root. Amara no longer saw her husband. She saw a thief dressed in custom suits, a parasite who had fed on her inheritance while treating her with contempt. Your entire family fortune is built on what you stole from mine, she said, her voice steady despite the danger crackling in the air. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because of my parents' work. Alexander moved with surprising speed for a man in his 70s, closing the study door with a decisive click. This emotional outburst solves nothing, Amara. You've misinterpreted fragments of information without understanding the complexities involved. Then explain them, she challenged, wrenching her wrist from Julian's grasp with newfound strength. Explain why you hid this ledger. Why you orchestrated our marriage precisely when I turned 25. Why my parents' multi-billion-dollar legacy disappeared while I grew up believing we had nothing. The moments stretched between them, taut with 21 years of carefully constructed lies. It was Alexander who broke first, his calculated pragmatism asserting itself as he assessed the new reality. Your parents were brilliant but naive, he said finally, his tone shifting to the reasonable patriarch explaining harsh truths to an emotional child. They created revolutionary agricultural technologies without understanding the political and economic forces that would seek to control them. When certain interested parties realized the potential of their work, your parents became targets. Targets, Amara repeated, the word hollow. You mean they were murdered? Alexander's expression remained impassive, neither confirming nor denying. What matters is that Vivian, yes, using the identity of Helen Winters, acted to protect both you and the technologies that could have fallen into dangerous hands. The trust was restructured to shield you from the same forces that threatened your parents. By stealing everything they built, Amara's laugh held no humor. By raising me in near poverty while you became billionaires from their patents? By forcing me to marry your son to maintain legal control when the trust terms would have transferred everything to me at 25. Julian's jaw tightened, that telling pulse at his temple betraying his mounting rage. You should be grateful, he spat. Without this marriage, you'd have nothing. Be nothing. That's where you're wrong. A new voice interjected as the study door swung open, revealing Walter Green flanked by two unfamiliar men in suits. She would have everything that was rightfully hers. Alexander's composure cracked for the first time, genuine alarm flashing across his features. This is a private family matter, Green. You're trespassing on my property. Actually, Walter replied, stepping into the room with the confidence of a man holding the winning hand. I'm here on official business. He nodded to the men beside him. These gentlemen are federal agents investigating financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges in connection with the Coal Agricultural Holdings case. Julian lunged forward, only to freeze as one of the agents smoothly revealed a holstered weapon beneath his jacket. This is absurd, he snarled. My father is Alexander Hawthorne. You can't possibly think. We have copies of the original trust documents, Walter interrupted, addressing Amara rather than the Hawthorne men. Your mother gave them to me for safekeeping the week before she died. She suspected someone close to them was attempting to gain control of their patents. The revelation struck Amara like a physical blow. She knew. Walter nodded, regret etching deep lines around his eyes. Not who specifically, but enough to take precautions. The document she entrusted to me contained a crucial provision. If anything happened to both your parents before you reached adulthood, a secure trust would activate, with assets held until you turned 25. Which was exactly when Alexander suddenly appeared with his marriage proposal. Amara realized, pieces clicking into terrible clarity. We've been building this case for years, the older agent explained, his tone professionally detached. Following the money, documenting the fraudulent identity Vivian Hawthorne used to access the coal trust, tracking the systematic transfer of patents and properties to Hawthorne shell companies. Alexander's expression had transformed from calculated control to grim assessment of diminishing options. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you believe you have, the statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing criminal enterprises, Walter finished for him, or to fraud that was deliberately concealed from the victim. The moment Vivian created false documentation to maintain control of the trust past Amara's 25th birthday, she reset the clock. Julian's face had drained of color, the full implications sinking in. This is why you hated her touching anything connected to the company, he said to his father, voice hollow with realization. Why you insisted she be kept away from the financial records, the board meetings, the Henderson merger. The Henderson merger, Amara repeated, sudden understanding dawning. It involves my parents' irrigation technology, doesn't it? That's why tonight's dinner was so crucial. You're selling stolen patents that legally belong to me. The slight flinch in Alexander's expression confirmed her suspicion more clearly than any confession. Mrs. Hawthorne, the younger agent addressed her formally. We need your statement and cooperation to proceed with arrests. Are you willing to provide testimony regarding your experiences since entering this household? For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered through Amara. Not because she questioned what needed to be done, but because the full weight of the Hawthorne's betrayal was still sinking in. The calculated cruelty, the years of gaslighting, the systematic erasure of her true identity. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. I'll testify to everything. This is your last chance, Amara, Alexander said quietly, his tone shifting to something almost paternal, the same manipulative concern he had used when first appearing at her queen's apartment with his non-negotiable proposal. Think carefully about what you're doing, about what this will mean for your future, for your name. My name, she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, is Amara Cole. And I'm exactly where I belong. As the agents moved to formally detain Alexander and Julian, the study door burst open once more to reveal Vivian, her perfect composure shattered by the scene before her. What is the meaning of this? Alexander, her voice died as her gaze landed on the ledger still clutched in Amara's hands, recognition and fear flashing across her carefully maintained features. Hello, Ellen, Amara said softly, using the name Vivian had employed while systematically dismantling her inheritance. Or should I call you Aunt Viv? Since you've been family all along, just not the way you pretended. Vivian's aristocratic features crumpled, the careful facade of Hawthorne dignity collapsing under the weight of exposure. You don't understand, she whispered. What we did was necessary. Your parents were naive, idealistic. Their technologies would have been weaponized, perverted for profit rather than progress. We protected their legacy by stealing it. Amara cut in, years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. By raising me in poverty while living in luxury built on their work. By forcing me to marry your son so you could maintain legal control of what was never yours to begin with. Julian, being handcuffed by the older agent, let out a harsh laugh entirely devoid of humor. And I never even knew the whole truth, he said, his gaze boring into his mother with newfound betrayal. You told me she was just a necessary legal connection, some distant cousin whose signature we needed for regulatory compliance. You never said our entire fortune was built on stolen coal patents. The admission that Julian had married her, believing she was merely an inconvenient legal necessity rather than the rightful heir to the fortune his family had stolen, should have hurt. Instead, it cemented Amara's clarity. There had never been a marriage in any true sense. Only a contract designed to bind her to their fraud. Your father handled those details, Vivian replied weakly, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as the younger agent approached with handcuffs. I only wanted to protect what we built, what we deserved after all our hard work managing the coal innovations. Managing? Walter interrupted, righteous anger breaking through his professional demeanor. You falsified documents, diverted funds, created an elaborate fiction to steal billions from a child whose parents you helped murder. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, silencing even the agent's procedural recitations of rights. We never, Vivian began, but Alexander cut her off with a sharp gesture. Say nothing more, Vivian, he commanded, the authority that had built an empire evident even in handcuffs. Our attorneys will handle this unfortunate misunderstanding. But the damage was done. The word murder had changed the atmosphere in the room, transforming a financial fraud case into something far darker. Amara stared at the woman who had occasionally visited during her childhood, bringing small gifts, asking perfunctory questions about her schooling, maintaining just enough connection to monitor without raising suspicion, and saw her truly for the first time. Not just a thief, but something infinitely worse. Did you orchestrate their car accident? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Or just take advantage of it? Vivian's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine shock. Amada, no, the accident was real. We never would have. She stopped abruptly at Alexander's warning glare, too late to retract the implicit admission in her denial. They had stolen everything else, but drawn the line at murder. Small comfort for a lifetime of calculated cruelty and theft. As the agents led the Hawthorne family from the study, Alexander maintaining dignified silence, Vivian struggling to compose herself, Julian alternating between rage at his parents' deception and bitter glares at Amara. Walter approached her with gentle concern. "You should sit down," he suggested, indicating a leather armchair. "This is a lot to process all at once." But Amara remained standing, the ledger still clutched to her chest like a shield, or perhaps a talisman. "My parents," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Tell me about them. The real them, not the fiction the Hawthornes created." Walter's expression softened with something like pride. "Martin and Eliza Cole were visionaries," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "Their irrigation systems transformed agriculture in arid regions across 3 continents. But more than that, they were principled. They refused to patent certain technologies, insisting they remain accessible to developing nations. They established the Cole Foundation specifically to ensure their innovations serve humanity rather than just shareholders. And they loved you fiercely," he added, his voice gentling further. "Everything they built was meant to be your legacy, not just wealth, but purpose. A chance to continue their mission of using technology to address global hunger and water scarcity." The simple statement that her parents had been building not just a fortune, but a meaningful legacy for her broke something open inside Amara that had been locked away since childhood. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in the Hawthorne mansion finally flowed freely, grief and rage and relief mingling in a cathartic release. "I don't even remember them clearly," she admitted, the confession painful but necessary. "Just fragments. The scent of my mother's perfume. My father's hands showing me how to play piano. We can fix that," Walter promised. "There are videos, letters, journals, all preserved in the original trust documentation. They made recordings for you, knowing how young you were, wanting to ensure you would know them even if something happened." The thought of hearing her parents' voices again after 21 years sent a fresh wave of emotion through Amara. Not just grief for what had been stolen, but hope for what might be reclaimed. "What happens now?" she asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass the mansion, the arrests, the shattered facade of her life as Amara Hawthorne. "Legally, a very complex process of asset recovery, fraud prosecution, and trust restoration," Walter explained. "The Cole patents alone are worth billions in current markets, not counting the properties, investments, and other holdings that were systematically transferred to Hawthorne control." He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "As for your marriage to Julian, given the circumstances of coercion and the criminal conspiracy it was designed to facilitate, there are strong grounds for annulment. As if it never existed. The prospect should have brought only relief. Instead, it carried a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a bone-deep exhaustion at the thought of more legal battles. More exposure, more navigation of systems designed to protect wealth and power rather than truth and justice. And personally, she pressed, needing something beyond legal proceedings to orient herself. "What do I do tomorrow and the day after, when this becomes public and the entire world knows what happened?" Walter studied her with compassion that held no pity. "You reclaim your name," he said simply. "You learn about the parents who loved you enough to create safeguards that survived 2 decades of elaborate fraud. You decide what to do with the resources and platform that are rightfully yours." His gaze moved to the ledger she still held. "And perhaps most importantly, you recognize that the strength that helped you survive in this household, enduring Julian's cruelty, navigating Vivian's manipulation, maintaining your dignity despite Alexander's machinations, that strength didn't come from nowhere. It's your parents' legacy too, as surely as any patent or property. The observation that her resilience was itself an inheritance settled something restless inside Amara. She had survived not by accident, but by birthright, carrying within her the same determination that had driven Martin and Eliza Cole to transform global agriculture against impossible odds. "Ms. Cole," the younger agent reappeared in the doorway. "We've secured the premises and contained the situation. A car is waiting whenever you're ready to leave." Ms. Cole, the name, her true name, felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like a favorite coat rediscovered after years of absence. "Thank you," she replied, straightening her shoulders with newfound purpose. "I'll need a few minutes to collect some personal items." As the agent nodded and withdrew, Walter rose from his chair. "I'll wait for you downstairs. Take whatever time you need." Alone in the study that had contained the proof of her true identity, Amara allowed herself one moment to absorb the seismic shift in her reality. 24 hours ago, she had been Amara Hawthorne, the quiet black wife who endured her husband's contempt while navigating the treacherous waters of high society. Now she stood revealed as Amara Cole, rightful heir to a revolutionary agricultural legacy, daughter of visionaries whose work had changed millions of lives, a woman with the resources and platform to continue their mission if she chose. The journey ahead would not be simple. The Hawthornes' legal team would fight ferociously to protect what remained of their empire. The public scrutiny would be intense. The process of reclaiming stolen assets would be lengthy and complex. But for the first time since entering the Hawthorne mansion as Julian's bride, Amara felt something like peace settle over her. Not because justice had been fully served. That would take years of legal proceedings. But because the truth had finally emerged from the shadows where it had been buried for 21 years. Her parents had not been forgotten. Their legacy had not been erased. And their daughter had found her way back to her true inheritance. Not just wealth and patents, but purpose and identity. As she left Alexander's study for the last time, ledger tucked securely under her arm, Amara caught a glimpse of herself in an ornate mirror in the hallway. The woman who looked back was neither the cowed wife nor the confused orphan, but someone altogether new yet anciently familiar. Amara Cole, finally in her rightful place. Julian's cruel command, "know your place," echoed in her memory as she descended the mansion's grand staircase for the final time. The words that had once cut like knives now brought a smile of grim satisfaction to her lips. She knew her place now, not beneath the Hawthornes, as they had intended, but as their reckoning, as her parents' daughter, as herself, fully and completely, for the first time in 21 years. Outside, the night air carried the first hint of autumn, a season of transformation, of old growth giving way to new possibilities. Amara breathed it in deeply as she walked toward the waiting car, leaving behind the mansion built on lies and stepping into a future shaped by newly revealed truth. She knew her place now, and had never been here at all. Did anyone else cheer when Amara walked out of that mansion with her head held high? Drop a comment if you're living for this justice, or if you're ready to see Amara reclaim her rightful empire. I'm absolutely dying to know where you're watching from and which part hit you hardest. Was it the murder revelation? Julian learning he was just a pawn? Or Amara finally embracing her true name? Hit that subscribe button if this story of reclaiming your power moved you as much as it moved me. I promise to bring you more emotional journeys that will have you on the edge of your seat. Remember, sometimes knowing your true place means walking away from those who try to diminish you.